Hello everyone, and today I'm going to rank the Big Brother Canada 4 cast by their gameplay based on what they displayed in the season and how I think they would do if they're on many other seasons and if you just threw them in there. This cast is easily the worst cast strategically based on how they played the game, and they are weaker than every other season thus far by eons. They are so emotional, and because a lot of them were recruits and didn't do much research, they were very clicky and they led a lot of their gameplay based off emotions. And some of the twists that were implemented in the game caused for a lot of derailments in natural gameplay, so it was harder to rank some of them as well. I'm not going to go through all the tiers by definition, since I've done that in a few of the other videos, so let's just get right to it. So there are a few people in the Abysmal tier, which isn't surprising. In dead last at 17th is none other than Levita. She misused her HOH not once, but twice. That rarely ever happened in Big Brother, and the fact that it happened twice to her showed that she not only didn't learn from her mistakes, but was unable to have power over her house guests and to put herself in a good position with a strong alliance/majority. She misused her first HOH, where she did not find herself in a majority and just isolated herself with Shari. She had a huge problem with socializing with the house guests. Most of her conversations were about strategy, and her game bodiness caused the others in a more emotional cast to not be able to bond with her on a personal or a game level. Most of the house guests were annoyed with her, and Levita had some sort of issue with the woman during the season, where she targeted many of them unprompted. Everyone blaming her for Joel's nominations also shows a flaw in her social perception pertaining to the other house guests. While she was a game bot and was aware enough to know that Hermione was gunning for her, and she was able to form a solid enough relationship with Dallas, Joel, and somewhat Mitch, who was just using her. Unfortunately, she was expendable to everyone. The sites that she was supposed to be on felt uncomfortable in talking to her, mainly due to her paranoia, and a lot of her strategic reads were awful, when she had many chances to improve on that. The fact that a supposed ally of hers, Emily, targeted her during a pre-jury double eviction when that side of the house was already low on numbers, solely because Levita was too much to deal with, shows a huge problem with her game. She's also good at competitions, but it's not enough to overcome her strategic and social flaws, and I don't think she will recover from her errors to do well if she was on other or multiple seasons. At 16th is Christine. It says a lot when there are 3 sides of a house, which almost never happens, and one of those sides include a bunch of floaters and or coasters, and she was not included in the middle alliance. It's a huge problem. She admitted that she didn't talk game much in the house, and didn't game much at all, as she was waiting for the game to happen so she could get involved then, but she was too passive in a season where many passive people were evicted and put in bad positions, since many of the people in the house were playing so hard, meaning that she was permanently left behind and couldn't keep up. It seemed like she could have built something with the Maddie and Dallas side of the house, but they never took her in, and everyone else saw her as very expendable, and that caused her to be the pawn that's voted out in her final week. She also had a relatively dour/sour personality that caused her to not gel with the other house guests. Even though her vote out was a close vote, it was more about people voting to keep or evict Cassandra, rather than anything about Christine. I don't see her doing well if you put her in most seasons. The final person in this tier at 15th place is Shari. I was going back and forth about whether to put her in an Abysmal or bad tier, since it could be argued that she fits in either, and depending on the mood I'm in, I could be argued into putting her in either category. She didn't last long, nor did she do anything really wild or abhorrent, but she didn't show anything good, and showed quite a bit that was actively very bad. She spent most of her first week in the HOH room with Levita instead of bonding with the other house guests and finding out what was going on in the house. She also talked Levita off pertaining why Kelsey felt comfortable, since Shari said that it was because Kelsey was enjoying her last few days in the house, which turned out to be false. By the end of the first week, she didn't find herself in any alliance really. She didn't campaign during her week that she was on the block and wanted to play a quote-unquote clean game, but gave no incentive as to why people should keep her. She went because they wanted to keep a target in the house, and I could see her low-key gameplay bringing her far in other seasons, hence why she's above the other two. She didn't actively rub people the wrong way like Christine, hence her being high on the list, but she made so many key flaws, and I don't know if she would learn from it, since she thinks campaigning and actually having to fight for herself means she's playing a dirty game. There are so many people in the bad tier. I believe close to half of the cast are in the tier, and it says a lot, since it's indicative of how poor the cast is as game players. At 14th is Paige. Like the other two pre-jurors who left as pawns essentially, she suffers from a lot of the same flaws that they do. She did not speak to much people during the first few days, and it not only caused her to go on the block, but it made it easy for people to flip the vote on her. She was very passive in the game, and I don't know if she campaigned, as we only got to see 20 minutes of the first week due to the horrible format of the first week in Big Brother Canada generally. It did seem like she got somewhat close to the Dallas side of the house, and she didn't have a personality that rubbed people the wrong way, like Christine, so I could see her making it far on many other seasons, hence her being in this tier and not in the bottom. At 13th place is Nikki. She did not play the game whatsoever throughout her time on the season. Within the first few days of the season, she threatened to quit the game, had several meltdowns, and would threaten to quit several more times throughout the season. She never even tried to think strategically and was a placeholder used for comedic relief throughout the season. Nikki was very easily manipulated, and the best example of this was the Dallas boot, where Mitch used Nikki's emotions and insecurity about Tim and Cassandra's friendship to cause her to flip the vote to evict Dallas. She and Tim got into a huge screaming match about the vote, and she only did it because she hated Cassandra at that point in time. Nikki was kept along as a vote and was never a part of any actual alliance, though Kelsey and the brothers were able to clock immediately that Nikki was never in the Freak Show alliance, like Tim, Joe, and Cassandra stated. And it says a lot that during her final week in the house, the Jared/brother side of the house was keen on getting rid of her, and by the time of the actual double eviction, the Freak Show were more than willing to get rid of her, and did get rid of her. No one respected her as a player. She was dragged along to the endgame, but didn't even make it to the very end. I don't see her doing well in any other North American BB season, and I can see her even going early in some cases. Rest in peace to Nikki. At 12th place is Dallas. I was expecting him to be horrible once I got into this rewatch, but he wasn't as bad as I thought. He was still bad and made a bunch of mistakes. One of them was lying about the first vote, where the split was very obvious, and it just gave off an untrustworthy vibe that he couldn't shake off for the rest of his time in the season. Another one was that he just talked way too loud, and it brought a lot of unwarranted attention to himself, and it was not like he was able to win people over to his side of the house, unlike even Jared to be honest, or maintaining good relations with people on his own side. He had his moments of strategic levity, like knowing Maddie sending Levita home was a dumb move, and that either the brothers or Jared should be backdoored, but it was also just very basic strategy, and it's worse because he can never convince people to do what he wants. And in addition to that, word got around to the house, especially to the brothers and Jared, that he planned on backdooring them with both of the vetoes he won. In addition to that, he did let his emotions get the better of him. In his final week in the house, he refused to suggest nominations to Tim because he thought it was stupid and it just built his targets even more, showing how unadaptable he is. He got into a few confrontations that wasn't shown on the episodes as well, and lacked tact in general. And as we would see, he's someone who doesn't do well in many seasons. At 11th place is Maddie. She wasn't good socially whatsoever, had many enemies in the house, specifically the third wheel, and even some people in the middle group. She rubbed many people the wrong way and lacked social grace with how she interacted and dealt with people. She actively pushed people away, where she would either send them home or people would want to send her home due to her attitude, preferring to work with the other side. Strategically, she wasn't good at all. Maddie actively encouraged the cattiness of the girls, causing them to target one another when it was not beneficial whatsoever, was on the wrong side twice very early on in the season, and wasted an HOH on Levita, one of the few people who was a shield for her in the house, because she thought that it would cause the entire house to want to work with her and see it as a big move, but it did the exact opposite. And then after that, she just secluded herself with Ramsey for the rest of her time in the house, and then sketched out even more people trying to keep everyone on ice during her second HOH. I don't think she was a genuine threat to win or was a respected player, and while I appreciated that she wanted to play the game, own it, and make big moves, unlike some people, she couldn't pull it off. She was spared in the Dallas boot, based off nothing she did, and seemed multiple at times, but was led by her emotions, and her strategy was not as good as she thought it was. I could see her being an early boot or lasting as long as she did in this season if she was placed on many other seasons. She's a high variance player in my opinion, who is a bit more on the negative side. And the final person on this tier at 10th is Ron. It is impressive that he was able to make two solid and really loyal allies in Kelsey and Jared, to the point where they became the most unbreakable alliance in the season. He also made a bond with Mitch, and could somewhat lay under the radar for a majority of his time in the season. At the same time, many other people found him to be annoying, impossible to game with, and he rubbed a lot of the house guests the wrong way with his antics and attitude. When he did actually play the game and became strategic, it actively ruined things for not only himself, but his allies. Once he was told about the Mitch stuff, his allies told him specifically to not say anything, but the first thing he did was blabber everything to Mitch, which ruined their advantage since they could have at least pretended to be on good terms with Mitch, depending on how they handled the information, which he blew. He wasted his HOH on Mitch, who was never even targeting him and wasn't targeting his alliance at that point, and the only reason why he felt forced to target Mitch was because he opened his mouth when he shouldn't have. Even when his allies gave him an out to the situation, he refused to take it. Let's not even forget that when the showmatch was on the block, he decided to help Jared win the veto instead of having them have him win the veto so he could take one of them off the block. Going home over Kelsey when she's the better player and in a showmatch is a huge negative on his part. And one of the main reasons why this ended up happening was because he was so annoying during his final week and couldn't campaign to save his life. He couldn't even be a successful coaster who was dragged to the endgame correctly. He didn't make many bonds with people and actively made things worse when he did try to game. He's only this high because I do see some scenarios where he does well, and I don't see him being an early boot much at all if he was placed on other seasons. So the next tier is the potential tier, and these people aren't good, but they aren't bad, and honestly they're just a very mixed bag, hence them not being in the mediocre tier or in any of the higher or lower tiers. At 9th is Phil, and I did say that I was going to rank the brothers separately in my last video. He was extremely lucky that he was able to play with his brother, since that's someone he could trust 100%, his brother could clean up his mistakes, and it was someone who could compete in half of the competitions for him. It was also beneficial because he had someone who can 100% count on and could be in other rooms that he isn't present in, and they can compare stories. I can go on and on about how it was beneficial for him, despite them being isolated in the first night. He did find himself to be in the middle of the house with the Mitch, Cassandra, Joel, and Tim side of the house, and they were able to sway the vote for the first half of the season. And he did withhold information, which is good, so he could be very selective words he stated, so it could not be used against him. At the same time, he was horrible strategically. He consistently pined for Jared throughout the season, who not only paid him dust until his final week and a half, conveniently, but was actively targeting the brothers most of the season. Would correct Nick on game moves when Phil's reads and moves actively made things worse for them. He is also very emotional and volatile, to the point where anytime people even mention their names, he lost his mind, he got argumentative, and rubbed many people the wrong way. The producers luckily confirmed to the house guests sometime in the early to mid portion of the season that the brothers were never separating as players, so that caused for him to calm down a bit as well. There was also the fact that the producers clearly switched the competitions in the second double to give the brothers the best chance of making it through, as they took a non-veto punishment to win the veto around prior. Lacked self-awareness, as he claims he never lied and never played a dishonest, cutthroat game when the jury wanted him to own his stuff. I don't know how he would do on his own, hence me putting him in this tier. Maybe his brother being in the game put a lot of pressure onto him, and it exemplified things for him, and he did have a lot of luck/conveniences in his favor. He's not a poor player, but not a good one, and there are way too many unknowns for me to put him in any other category. The final person in this tier at 8th place is Kelsey. I also heavily struggled with where to place her, since while she did learn the game as it went on, which a lot of people generally don't do, there are a lot of flaws that went into how she performed throughout the season, and how I think she would perform if she was on other seasons with other situations. She got very cliquey very quickly with Jared and Ral, making it known to the entire house that those two were the only people she would heavily care about and ride for to the end, and it caused for people to be threatened by it and them. Kelsey never thought about the game on her own that didn't include either one of them until they were both out of the game. Made a lot of moves for them and not herself, which she eventually reiterated to the jury in her jury deliberations, where she wasted most of her time praising the two of them when she already had their votes locked, and she needed to convince the other jurors. A lot of the moves she made were personal, and she got way too caught up into the catty drama with the women and let it just go on and on. Jared had to push her into making a deal with Levita, which she complained about so they could be safe, complained about all the women going after her while not actively making things better with any of them, and made a fake deal with Ramsey, which she was exposed for and which caused the lines to be drawn with them in the mid-game. She also took Cassandra taking Jared out way too personally. She was lucky to have even come back into the house to begin with, since her eviction was all under normal circumstances, and with her flaws, she's probably a pre-juror in many other situations/seasons. While it was somewhat impressive that she was able to get her allies to turn on Mitch, who heavily led her first ouster, she only got that information due to the live feeds, and it put all the attention on the third wheel again when she came back, and her flirting strategy was a mixed bag. Kelsey did become more strategic as the season went on, was able to get some people on her side, like Cassandra and the brothers, throughout various points of the season, and was the smart one out of herself and the brothers in the last portion of the season. But another issue was that she never owned that she was being deceitful and cutthroat, which the jury wanted to hear from her. Now it is time to move on to the people in the mediocre tier, and these are people who are average, right in the middle. Not special in either direction, and doesn't really have potential, hence them being in the middle. So at 7th is Ramsey. He is mainly here because he didn't make many mistakes compared to the people lower and even some people who are higher. But he also didn't make any or many good moves either, compared to some people who are lower, and especially compared to some people who are higher than him. Out of everyone in his alliance, he had the best social game, as most of the house but Cassandra liked him and felt bad for him over the others. It didn't seem like anyone, outside of Cassandra, was targeting him throughout the entire season, though he would have went home if Maddie won the veto in his final week. At the same time, he rarely used his social game for his own benefit outside of his alliance, outside of making a deal with Jared in the middle weeks. During the latter half of his stay, he actively worsened his otherwise good social standing by isolating himself with and getting into a showmance with Maddie. There really isn't much to talk about strategically. He was in an alliance with Maddie and Dallas, remained loyal to them the entire season, and while he made a side alliance with Jared, which showed some potential, he never actively involved himself or had himself involved in the dynamics of the game overall. I don't know if he was intentionally laying under the radar, but he did not have much of a target, and could win a comp to save himself when he needed to. I actually do remember him stating that he threw a few competitions from what I remember. I don't ever see him being an early boot if he was on other BBCAN seasons, but I don't know if he's strategic or active enough to really rise to be a solid, good, or a great player. Mediocre fits best for him overall. So the final person in this tier at 6th is Nick. He is here instead of the potential tier like his brother because I feel like his brother is a bit more inconsistent and can go in either direction, where Nick is pretty linear in my opinion. He was very lucky to have his brother in the house since that's someone he could trust 100%, gather information from, and cooperate stories with, while also playing as the same player, meaning he doesn't have to compete for half of the weeks in the season, and his brother could be in some of the rooms that he's not present in. Competitively, he was one of the best, if not the best in the house, since he won most of the competitions for the brothers, and in the house overall. And this is with him only competing in half of the weeks, so imagine if he competed in all the weeks. With this in mind, he has a very high competition win and performance equity. Strategically, there's not much to discuss. He did have a better read on people compared to his brother, as Nick knew Jared wasn't worth-ish in comparison, but was told to not game, shut up, and to follow his brother all of the time, so he did not follow his own instincts that much. He spent a majority of the first half of the season laying in the bedroom with Maddie, but people seemed to like him more than Phil, since he wasn't argumentative in comparison. I actually remember him being very passive strategically, but didn't make many bonehead decisions, if any. Like his brother, he acted like he never lied or did anything deceitful in the game, and had the perception that they, meaning the brothers, hid behind everyone else in the middle group. He also did have his emotional and short-sighted moments, like him wanting to nominate himself and his brother once Cassandra vetoed him on the second double, and then badgering the two of them later because Phil did throw Kelsey under the bus to them in the Red Room during the Final Five, which Nick wasn't present for. With the solid tier, these are players who will pretty much do well in most, if not all, of the seasons, and have a lot of the good skills that causes for them to be a Big Brother player, but they have a few notable flaws, or just lack excellence or greatness overall, hence them being here. At 5th place is Jared. I wasn't expecting to put him this high once I started rewatching the season, but seeing how horrible a majority of his castmates are as players and how much better he comes off in comparison, here is the most fitting spot for him, and he's ranked relatively high amongst the weakest cast strategically. He became very cliquish with Kelsey and Raul right from the beginning, which threatened and intimidated people, especially when he immediately got into a showmance with Kelsey. Despite the cliquishness, people still wanted to work with him, like the brothers, Levita, Maddie at certain points, Mitch, and he had the benefit of Cassandra, someone he knew in real life, being in the same house as him. Out of his alliance, he seemed to be the most sound strategically, as he made a deal with Levita during the first HOH competition, as well as her second HOH to keep them safe, and didn't play as emotionally as his other allies. At the same time, he did reject allies consistently throughout the season, like rejecting the Paquette until the last week and a half of his game. He broke the deal with Levita first, did nothing with the deal with Ramsey, so on, and could not handle when he was being outplayed at various points throughout the season. He had an issue with threat management, since everyone from the very beginning claimed that he was the biggest threat to win and thought he was the leader of his alliance, though no one wanted to target him specifically for most of the season. He didn't handle the Mitch situation well, though Raul was the one who mainly blew it, and felt too comfortable/complacent at several points in the season, like not trying as hard in the vetoes, which eventually caused his downfall, in addition to his entitlement, acting like he was quote-unquote good, honest, and not deceitful, holds him back from being in the higher tiers. The final person in this tier at 4th is Joel. For someone who fits in the archetype that is known for being very antisocial and having a lot of struggles socially, he was actually very strong in that regard, and I see it as his biggest strength as a player. Everyone in the house liked and felt sorry for him, though it would become a detriment at times, and that worked for him during a very hostile season and a cast like this one. Despite being very well liked, he never really took advantage of truly being a floater. Yes, he was in the middle group, but they were a group pitting the two sides against one another, and chose loyalties to Mitch, Cassandra, and Tim specifically throughout the season, which never wavered. I think he was too loyal to Tim and Cassandra, where they made it clear that they prioritized one another over him, which was shown in the Final 6 and even in the Final 5. He wasn't good in competitions throughout the season, which was something that bothered him, and he was also seen as a meek/easily influenced player, meaning that they didn't see him as someone with a lot of agency. He doesn't seem to have killer instinct like Cassandra and Tim did, which caused him to be severely outplayed in the Final 5 once his double dealing was outed, and he cannot come up with an efficient campaign to save himself or to use others as shields. I don't see him being a target early in most seasons, and I could see him making it far in many others, but I don't think he has what it takes to win a season, or to be in the quote-unquote good or great tiers. And the final tier for this group are the good players. So these are the people who have very impressive moves, they're very adaptable, they have generally all the skills to do well, but they're just not at the top of the top for one reason or another. So at 3rd place is Mitch. Of course, one of the main reasons why he is so much higher than the others is that he was blatantly twist-screwed and taken out in an unforeseen way that most people cannot overcome. As we know, Levita and Kelsey were isolated for a week where they were allowed to talk a game together and were allowed to watch feeds. Without that twist and where things ended before she came back, he was nowhere in discussion to be targeted or sent home in the following week. He was a part of the middle group, who has a majority of the better players in the season, and while he was close to the third wheel side of the house, especially Jared and Rao, he was still able to build a solid enough relationship with the other side, mainly Maddie being a prime example. He was able to line up all of his allies into one side by the end of week 5, especially with convincing an emotional Nikki to vote out Dallas. He threw a lot of competitions throughout most of his time on the season, so he was aware enough to not come off as a huge comp threat, unlike the brothers Dallas, Levita, and Jared. He knew the strengths and weaknesses of all of his allies, with claiming Nikki and the brothers being extremely emotional players who needed to be coddled and nurtured, and Tim having a huge ego which will affect him, so on and so forth. He seemed very self-aware overall and knew to hide behind the bigger and more volatile personalities. Despite all of his positives and being twist-screwed, I still can't put him any higher because he still only made it halfway through the season and was the first juror. Even before he was nominated, people seemed to know that he was sneaky and someone that was a threat, so that was an issue, and I don't think he had a legit ride or die in the middle alliance. The others in that alliance were able to get themselves out of sticky situations, but he couldn't. But even with that, he was close to staying, so that does say a lot about him as a player. In second place is Cassandra. My opinion on her didn't go down per se, but it definitely became a lot more neutralized once I rewatched the season. I say this because there are some moments where she benefited from luck, with there being a good chance she is targeted or at least nominated on week 6 without Kelsey returning. The HOH that she got was a competition where her father had to compete, where she would not have won otherwise. It's also one of the reasons why she's not in the great tier, and she honestly benefited from so many people in the cast being bad. Cassandra really knows how to get people on her good side, and how to get them to trust her. Of course, she had the benefit of having Jared in the house, since he was someone that she knew in real life, and it gave her an in on that side of the house. She got in with the middle group of the season, and even when she betrays people, especially the brothers and Kelsey, she would get them on her side again, and they would want to repay things with her. This even happened with Nikki sometimes in the season. Even with Maddie, they're both trading words with one another at the end of week 5 and immediately agreed to put their feud aside once it was announced that one of Levita or Kelsey was coming back. She was always playing the game and reaching out to everyone, where many people in the cast just kept to their own corners and allegiances. She played a part in keeping Levita over Shari because she wanted to use her, built key bonds with Joel and Tim throughout the season, and tried to keep Dallas and Kelsey, though the fact that she lost both rounds is concerning. Of course, there was her pushing to evict Rao, so the showman can be around as a shield, while generally having better relationships with Jared and Kelsey, while not having a good relationship with Rao. I will say that she used her HOH very well, as she was the one who took out the person to beat. It also was impressive how she stayed in the final 5 over Joel, especially with how tense things were in the beginning of the week. I did notice more and more of her flaws in the season. Some of her commentary rubbed people the wrong way, like calling Levita a dumb biatch after she won HOH. Her humor also annoyed other people. She made unnecessary deals and broke them, which we saw in the second double eviction. She refused to study for endgame competitions, and I do think she listened to Tim a bit too much and prioritized him a bit too much, even over Joel and certain other moves that were in her best interest. And at first place as the best player of the season, at least in my eyes, is Tim. Clearly, he has proven to be the most adaptable person, just because he came from Australia, where he won Big Brother over there, and the format in Australia is completely different than Canada. Learned the format for Canadian Big Brother very quickly and thrived here as well. He played dumb throughout the first few weeks, but it became clear to others that he knew more than what he was letting on. During his one HOH, he resorted to nominating in the Australian way, where he could make everyone feel safe, since it was the house nominations and no one could get mad at him. And he also was able to get intel from the entire house on how they felt about the dynamics and players in the house. He decided to quote-unquote coach people throughout the season, which helped him socially bond with all of the house guests and make them feel safe/secure with him. Many people thought that he did not want to win, and that he was helping others win, which is the same thing Cardi did in BB2, but to a more exhilarated sense here, since Tim already won Big Brother beforehand, and it helped him be a quote-unquote middle person. His best mentor was most definitely with Cassandra. Actually, no, she's his mentee, as they bounced off one another throughout the season and encouraged her to make some of the best moves, and even do some certain moves that were better for him than her, like redoing him in the double. Like Cassandra, his flaws have become a lot more noticeable during this rewatch. One is that he has a huge ego and gets really frustrated and does not communicate well when things don't go his way. We see this in the baseball have-not competition and in the Final Five veto where he doesn't communicate with Joe and lashes at his alliance because he is tired of being in a team. There was also him essentially quitting in the final three, where he stated that he did it so he can control his narrative / fate or whatever, but it's clear that he did it because he did not study his days for the endgame competitions and got too frustrated. So that is my ranking tier list on the BBCAN4 cast as game players, and it was a lot easier than I thought because a lot of them were so bad and I didn't have to consistently reshuffle like I had to do with BBCAN2 and especially BBCAN3. I'm looking forward to watching BBCAN5 and making some compilation videos. Thank you all, and I'll be back soon.